Here we have our base block. We're going to need to indicate where the holes are going to be drawn and cut on this block. First, we're going to need to indicate where the center of this block is. Now these all are relatively the same in size, so what we'll need to do is we'll need to take a ruler and we're going to need to indicate where that center is by measuring on your ruler. Now if we look here, I'll want to line up the ruler so that the edge mark, the first mark here on the ruler, is on the very edge of my block. I don't want that to be the edge of the ruler because it won't measure correctly. Now on these blocks, they're a little more than 3¼ inches wide. So the halfway mark is 1 11/16 of an inch. So when we go and measure, we'll want to measure 1 inch, and then on one edge of your ruler is going to be a 16th. So each one of these marks is 1/16 of an inch. So I'll need to go over 11 marks to get 11/16. So I'll make a little mark right where 11/16, 1 11/16 is at. And then I'll need to do the same thing on the bottom of the block so that I can connect the two lines together and make this line straight up and down along the center. So then once I mark those two, then I can connect those two marks together and I'll get exact center of this block. It's important that we get these holes to line up, because if they don't, then the gumball or the candy will not fall through properly. Once I've marked where the center line is, I'll need to indicate how far up from the bottom and how far down from the top those holes need to be, which is 1½ inches. So I will take my ruler and I will set the edge of the block at 1½ inches, like so, and I'll make a mark right here, and then I'll turn the block around, and I will do the same thing here on the other side, so that I make a little cross where the lines come together. Right in the center, that's where I will need to drill my holes. So I have my two front holes, my diagonal and the one that's going to go straight. Now if you're going to do a diagonal hole in the front and then your other straight one in the side, then we would need to draw that on one of the sides here instead of in the front like I did. Now the last thing is you're going to need to indicate where the center of this block is. So to do that, you're going to do what I did, make an X. So you take your ruler, and on these blocks they have rounded corners, so you have to watch where the center of the corner is on the block. And you take your ruler, you go from corner to corner, the center of the curve on the piece of wood to the other edge, the center of the curve, and you mark it, and you make an X. And that's how you find the center of a rectangle shaped object. And so I'm going to do the same thing, make an X, and where the center is, that's where we'll drill the hole that goes in the top. Now that center of that X should line up with the line that I drew here on the side. So if we look, this line here lines up with the center of the X here. We want all the holes to line up in line with each other. So if it doesn't look like those line up, then we'll need to redraw those lines, redo the X, and make sure everything looks just like how mine looks, so that everything lines up. The next thing we're going to look at is how to make the base for the tray. Now the base is going to stick out about 3 inches out from the front here, and what you want to do is you want to get a block or piece of wood cut from your instructor, and you want your base block to sit on top of that, and from the front of the base block to the front of your tray area, that's 3 inches. Now what we want to do here is we'll make a circular shape from using a jar or a compass if we want it circular on the front, or you could just leave it square. This time I wanted it circular. And what you'll do is you'll take this shape, and you'll need to cut that if it's rounded. So we end up with a piece of wood that looks like this after we cut it on the scroll saw. What you'll need to do here is you'll need to take a scrap piece of wood, and you'll need to take that and place that on top of the scrap piece of wood. And the scrap piece of wood needs to be kind of long going this way so that you can trim down the length of this fence that you're going to make out of this scrap piece of wood. And it might be a little longer than you need it, but that's okay. So you're going to trace the shape of the curve onto this scrap piece of wood, and you'll have something that looks like this. You're going to trace that curve, and then you're going to have to give it a thickness. You don't want it too thick and you don't want it too thin. This here is about a little more than a 1/4 inch, I'd say. And so this area here is what we'll actually be cutting out of this block. That's what we'll keep. This piece is what is going to get glued onto this piece here, and that's going to be the fence that keeps the gumball from rolling out. So once we get that cut out, then we'll need to sand it, sand the inside of the curve here. We'll need to glue these two pieces together. So it'll actually go on this piece that's already cut, and it will keep that gumball from rolling out. Then once the pieces are dry, the glue is dry, then we can sand the outside edge to make it nice and even, because when you glue them together they're not going to be perfectly evenly shaped. And then you'll glue this whole entire piece on after we're all done painting. If we need to paint it separate colors than the base block, or we can glue it on to paint it all one color. So if this block here is going to be the same as this piece here, then we can glue it together and have it as one piece before we move on. Otherwise we'll want to keep them separated until we finish painting.